This is Software Engineering Radio, the podcast for professional developers on the web at se-radio.net. SE Radio is brought to you by the IEEE Computer Society and by IEEE Software Magazine. Online at computer.org/software. DigitalOcean recently launched Spaces, a beautifully simple object storage service designed for developers who want a simple way to store and serve a vast amount of data, such as images and large media files, user-generated content, backups, and logs. Spaces is available for a simple $5 per month price that includes 250 gigabytes of storage and 1 terabyte of outbound bandwidth. Additional storage is priced at the lowest rate available, 1 cent per gigabyte transferred and 2 cents per gigabyte stored. This provides cost savings of up to 10 times along with predictable pricing and no surprises on your monthly bill. Try it for free with a 2-month trial by going to do.co/SERadio.
This is Nate Black for Software Engineering Radio. I'm very pleased to welcome Ron Lichty, co-author of Managing the Unmanageable, to the show. Recruited to Apple in 1988, Ron product managed Apple's development tools, then led the Finder and applications groups for the Apple II and Macintosh product lines, managing delivery of Apple's user interface. Ron went on to direct development of entertainment products at Berkeley Systems and Fujitsu, specializing in making development predictable and repeatable. Ron then led software development of Schwab.com's first online investment tools. Since Schwab, he has had vice president roles in engineering and products, both as an employee and as a consultant. Ron has given a conference and professional group talks on implementing Agile and Scrum and transforming software development from chaos to clarity. Ron, welcome to Software Engineering Radio.
Thanks, Nate.
Your book, Managing the Unmanageable, talks about programming managers in contrast to other kinds of managers. Could you define what is a programming manager?
Well, a programming manager is a manager who manages programmers, and the challenge is that my co-author, Mickey Mantle, and I think that programmers we who are or have been programmers are a pretty unique bunch. We tend to refer to ourselves as software engineers, but while there's some engineering aspects to what we do, there's also art to what we do. It's no weird thing that there's a huge crossover between software developers and musicians. The number of programmers who also do music is really huge. And interestingly, music has both a left brain and a right brain kind of aspect to it. It has a very, very analytical way that it's put together and a very artful way to deliver it to delight customers. When we're in the software business, our goal is to delight customers, but we have to be very analytical about it as well as artful. And that combination of engineering and artfulness, or engineering and craft, is pretty unusual. Electronics engineering is very cut and dried. Mechanical engineering is very cut and dried. Aeronautical engineering is very cut and dried. Civil engineering is very cut and dried. Software engineering, not so much. We start with thought stuff. We conjure up. I have friends who are novelists who say, writing software is a lot like writing a novel. You start with a blank page and craft it from there.
Part of the challenge of being a programming manager is the nature of the work itself, but also the fact that programmers themselves are different. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the challenge in managing us and managing programmers is that not only are we different from everyone else, but we're different from each other. So programmers are different from everyone else in the sense of being both left-brained and right-brained, in being both engineers and craftspeople. And we have to motivate and to enable both parts of brains, both parts of who programmers are. And we also have to think about how programmers differ from each other, not just how they differ from other groups of people, but how they differ from each other. In our book, we slice and dice us into in various ways to try to be helpful in understanding who we are. So web developers are different from database developers, are different from systems developers, are different from business logic developers, are different from scripters. There are morning people and night people. There are farmers and cowboys. There are so many ways to think about it. And ultimately, every programmer is unique. And the challenge for us as managers is to figure out that uniqueness of each of the people who work for us and to truly connect with and support and enable each of those qualities and each of those people.
Is it correct to say that the manager is responsible for managing people and their careers, or are there other responsibilities? For instance, do managers write code?
So do managers write code? So that's a great question. The answer is that there are plenty of managers who do write code. What Mickey and I would say about that is that if you're managing and you're writing code, and that code is critical path code, you are likely to focus on one of those things or the other, and you're likely to do at most one of them well, and possibly neither of them well. They're very different qualities. The transition from programming, the transition through a career path, one of the rules of thumb is that the very thing that makes you successful at one level gets in your way at the next. So think about, what does it take to be a great programmer? One of the characteristics that makes you great at being a programmer is the ability to shut out the world, to climb into the microprocessor and listen to the gates open and close, to truly become one with the computer. And that's just exactly the opposite of what you need to do as a manager. As a manager, you need to not only put a welcome mat out in front of your door, but to proactively welcome interruptions from the people who work for you, from your peers, and from your boss, because all of that stuff is what you're managing and trying to create with the people that work for you, teamwork and motivation, and or to get out of the way of their own motivation. And it's really a people kind of job with a technical kind of background.
You've talked before about the need for programmers to focus on their work and focus being an important part, but you just mentioned that managers are taking interruptions all the time. So it seems that their priorities are, in a way, flipped from what a programmer's priorities are. Is that right?
Yeah, so a manager's priorities are their programmers. And I, as a manager, need to be aware of and available to my team pretty much all the time.
Why is programming management hard?
Well, to start with, to be a good programming manager, you almost have to have been a programmer before that, much as football coaches and basketball coaches and tennis coaches played the game. With very rare exceptions, before becoming that coach, we as managers are essentially coaches of our teams. And knowing what it is that our teams face, what it is that the people who are on our teams face, and what it is that bring them together to cause great stuff to happen is a real challenge. One of the things that I just cited was that change from climbing from shutting out the world to inviting the world to interrupt us. One of the things that makes that hard is that some very large percentage of us who are programmers are introverts. And what we need to do is learn extroversion skills. What we need to learn is people relationship skills. What we need to learn is empathy skills, that soft stuff, that emotional intelligence stuff that makes people comfortable talking to us, because fundamentally that's what we want, is our teams to talk to us and to tell us what's important and what's getting in their way and how we can help.
How much training do managers usually have before they're thrown into the fire, so to speak?
Great question. I have talked to audiences of now probably thousands of managers. And it's a question that I ask to find out exactly how much management training I'm seeing in my audience. And I'll have everybody in the audience who's a manager stand up, and I will ask those who have had at least one day of training in management, just one, to stay standing. Half my audience will sit down. Almost universally, half my audience sits down. And then I'll ask those of you, all of you standing, have had at least one day of training in management. This is not managing programmers. This is just something related to management. If you had a day of that training before you became a manager, stay standing. We're looking at 5% or less of managers who've had a day of training. It's really ironic, the amount of training we expect programmers to have in programming and the lack of training that we expect of managers.
You also pointed out that many programming managers fall into the job almost without any planning, almost as if it happens by accident.
So becoming a manager is not something we get to decide. We can train for it, we could plan for it, we could prepare for it, we could think this is my career path, but it's somebody else who decides whether we get an offer to be a manager, and that managerhood offer could come because our manager quits and his manager says, Ron, you've got some people skills, you manage the team. And that happens more often than not in talking with a lot of managers. You were just tapped to become the manager, and you're stepping into a role that you may have given it some thought, but you certainly haven't given it the kind of thought that it deserves.
What should you think about before you accept that role and step into this new role?
You want to think about what it is that you want to do and what you like to do. And I would suggest think about trying it out. You know, we do in modern management, in modern project management, we talk about process experiments. And, you know, I think this is without, given lack of manager candidates, you may be the best shot your team's got at having a good manager. So that would be one thing to think about is, am I the best shot my team's got for having a manager? Because that could make a really big difference. And then think about, let me try this out and think about it. So my own transition to being a manager was, I was intrigued by, I was interested in becoming a manager. I was a programmer. I had what I thought was the best job in the whole world. I was in a 2-person programming shop. We were doing everything from embedded microcontrollers to compiler code generators to multimedia entertainment applications and early word processing software. And I was really intrigued by, I wonder what managing a group of people like me would be like. And I was thinking about that, and it was really the only reason that I wanted to leave this 2-person shop was I couldn't become a manager in a 2-person shop. And there was one other company I was interested in working for, really interested in working for, and that was Apple Computer. And Apple made me an offer to come be a manager. And I said, sure, yes, I'll come do that. In fact, I was not managing developers. I was asked to come create a product management group in a technical sense, a product management group of development tools inside of Apple Computer. And I spent about a year and a half being a manager in that product management organization before Apple in those days, and probably still, reorgs pretty incessantly. And about a year and a half in, they reorged my job out of existence and said, go looking for another job inside of Apple. And I thought about it and thought, this has been interesting. I'm going to be a programmer again. I went back to being a programmer. I don't think I was a programmer for more than a month or two before they made me the manager. 6 months later, they blew up that group. I went looking for another programming job. About a month or two later, they made me the manager. It was only that third time being a manager that I truly felt like this was what I wanted to do. It's a very different role, programming and managing programmers. And, you know, I think you really have to think about the trade-offs are that as a programmer, you're working on code, you're working on making thought stuff work. You're working on hard technical challenges. And when you succeed, it's so ecstatically wonderful that you jump out of your chair